All right, so I'm going to give you the link to the first tarot lesson, and it has within it my caveats on that. I don't consider tarot a woo-you type of thing. I consider it a way to access your unconscious. And in terms of dealing with other people, if you become a tarot reader, you need to be aware that you're accessing other people's unconscious. And it's in a way, it's a kind of party trick, but it also works to access the unconscious. And it always works. And so I've boasted, and I can tell you that it's true, that if I went into an auditorium with 1,000 people in it and threw the tarot cards across the stage in no special layout and simply did a reading, everyone in the room would think I had done a reading for them, as long as they would give me the benefit of the doubt. And that's because the tarot is so full of archetypal images that it touches everyone, and it can't fail to do that. Thomas says, does Dr. Jung intend to use the commentary as a sort of warning to we Occidentals as we might begin to study Eastern texts? Yeah, there's sort of an element to that, and I think that relates to the fact that Dr. Jung himself was relatively ignorant about the East. And let's remember where he was in 1913 to 18 when he was doing his Red Book. Or when he was having his visioning experiences, he hadn't worked all this stuff out at that time. And so you can see time periods in his earlier career when he hadn't worked out a lot of ideas. And he knew that if you have an encounter, it can go wrong. And I acknowledge that, mine could have gone wrong if I didn't have a strong ego. And I was able to control it. And the reason I didn't put it out originally, it's now available on our Dropbox for free to people who are on our Dropbox, but it's also available on Amazon as Meiko, Memoirs of a Woman. It's about a woman who is sold by her father to pay a debt when she's 15 years old and becomes the first woman prime minister of Japan. That's the fundamental story, but it contains, shall I say euphemistically, certain erotic passages. And so that's what worried me originally, and I didn't really know where all that was coming from. I now recognize that those were shadow elements of my own psyche, and so I can now explain what they are and where they came from. But for the longest time I couldn't, and so I left the book in my drawer, and I only published it in Kindle version on Amazon in 2014. Let's see. Yes, Thomas. Yeah, he was saying be careful, and that's what Edinger is saying too. He's saying that once you start off these archetypal items, or you start the individuation process, it can be dangerous, and you need to understand what you're dealing with, because ultimately, when you get at depth in your own psyche, you come face to face with evil. And you need to have a strong enough ego so that you can handle that. I don't know what more to say beyond that. But, the opposites exist in all of us, and no one who's watching this should kid themselves that they don't have an evil part deep down in there. And so you need to be ready for it, and you need to have a strong enough ego, because your unconscious has developed instinctually and evolutionarily over 3.5 billion years since the first single-celled organisms were. We all have a grandparent that was a single-celled organism, believe it or not, and we're in a continuous line of sons and daughters since then. And the psyche that developed in the deep unconscious is energized by opposites. And Jung mentions that in this reading. And so among the things that are in there are things that are not appropriate for 21st century life. And so when you experience those things, it is very important that you have developed a strong enough ego so that you can make proper moral decisions about what comes up. There's two streams coming up out of the unconscious. One's on the good side, one's on the dark side. And you have to be able to differentiate in your ego, in your conscious mind, and decide what is appropriate, because your unconscious doesn't have to live in the 21st century. It was put together and finalized on the day of your birth. But you and your ego does have to live in the 21st century. And so you can't just bubble up things that are not appropriate. Miles says, I find it interesting that I know several people like you who are eminently intelligent. They then have a belief that causes me cognitive dissonance, like a Tarot or extraterrestrials, not a criticism. Well, the Tarot is not a belief, Miles. I know what the Tarot does, and it works on the basis of a conversation. So, if I say the word boat, I have no idea what comes into your mind when I say the word boat. It could be a canoe, it could be a rowboat, it could be a 25-foot power yacht, it could be a 40-foot sailboat, it could be a yacht like the founders of Microsoft have, or it could be the Queen Mary. I have no idea what would come to your mind when I say that word. And so, but what I do know about the Tarot is that the Tarot is based on archetype, and particularly the major arcana. And so if you go back and listen to my classes, beginning with the one that I gave you the link for, you will find the appropriate caveats, but you will also find why I say what I say about it. I'm not going to do it all now again, because it was about a 10-hour teaching at least in total. But when I say something about your mother based on the Empress card, if I'm reading the Tarot, I would read the Empress card as mother. And so if I say something about mother from the Empress card, I know it's going to affect you, because you have a relationship with your mother, and so it's not a question of ooey-oo, it's not a question of belief, it's a question of fact, and I know I can't know what reading you hear. As I say, if I gave a reading to 1,000 people, everyone would hear a different reading because everyone is listening and hearing these same words, but every word is different. I read this the other day, but I'll read it again. This is from the Red Book, from the Reader's Edition, and I'm reading from page 244. And so Jung's psyche says to him in the form of the Anchorite is speaking in Jung's vision, and he says, "You must know one thing above all. A succession of words does not have only one meaning, but men strive to assign only a single meaning to the sequence of words in order to have an unambiguous language. This striving is worldly and constricted and belongs to the deepest layers of the divine creative plan. On the higher levels of insight into divine thoughts, you recognize that the sequence of words has more than one valid meaning." And so, a tarot reader is simply reading, their version of what they see on the reading, and you're reacting to it in the way you react to it. I have no idea how you're hearing my tarot reading, but I know that it will reach you at a very deep level because I'm talking about archetypes. It's as simple as that. And so it's not a question of me believing, and it's not a question of extraterrestrials. And interestingly, as you probably saw here, I'm going to move into discussion of the movie Arrival here in a moment, which is about extraterrestrials. So Thomas Dennis says, "One can appreciate the archetypal nature of the images of the tarot without putting up a fortune-telling sign in the front of one's home." Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I sometimes do readings for myself if I'm trying to understand what my psyche thinks about something. I do readings, and you don't have to take it as gospel. It's you just learn from it. From paragraph 4 here. So he's making the comment about when the wrong man uses the right means work in the wrong way. And so, Miles or anyone, if you go and buy a tarot book at Barnes and Noble, and you put out a reading and then read the definitions from the tarot book, it'll have some meaning, but it will work in the wrong way because it won't be organic from you. I mean, if you're going to be a tarot reader, then you have to be a tarot reader, and you have to build up some confidence and understanding about what it means. And so anyway, an example of this came in the movie Arrival, and my wife and I have purchased this movie because we like it very much. It's extremely Jungian, and as you probably know if you saw it, if you didn't see it, I urge you to see it about 10 times so you might then understand it. But I just want to comment on a couple of things. The gist of the plot is that aliens arrive on Earth, and they arrive in 12 vehicles that park over different parts of the world. And in the early part, they're attempting to identify a linguist who will be able to interact with the aliens and understand where they come from and why are they here and that sort of thing. And keep in mind that these aliens are impervious to anything we do to them, or try to do to them. And so we're just trying to understand what's going on. So the heroine of the movie is in the movie, her name is Louise, and Louise is asked what something means, and she says, I'm not going to be able to tell you unless I go there. And the army officer refuses to take her, and so he's saying that he's going to go on to Berkeley, where there's another linguist. And she says, well, ask him what the Sanskrit word for war is. And what happens 5 minutes later in the movie is that the colonel is back, and the guy in Berkeley had said the word for war was argument, which is a literalist dictionary definition, logos definition of the word. And she says the meaning of it is a desire for more cows, which is a reference to greed, and which is a reference to the causes of war. And so Forrest Whitaker, who's playing the colonel, takes her, obviously, she's the heroine of the movie, because she groks it. She's got the Eros interpretation. And the other interesting thing is, at the end of the movie, the Chinese general, in a vision, whispers in her ear what his wife, the last words his wife said to him before she died. And she's having this as a prefiguration vision. And what he says to her, this is online, you can't hear it in the movie, and so it was sort of obfuscated in the movie, but fans of the movie have discussed it online. War doesn't produce winners, only widows. And so this was a Chinese woman saying to her Chinese general husband as she's dying that phrase, in Mandarin, of course. And so because she has this prefiguration, this vision of what the general said to her and told her, then she's able in the moment to go back and say that to him over the telephone. And it's a very complicated movie about the insubstantiality of the time-space continuum. So, there's just so much Jungian stuff, we'd have to spend a whole evening only talking about that, which we can do in the future. But my wife and I have been making quite a study of it over the last year or so, and we've probably seen it at least 10 times. And Thomas, just for your information, there's also a review of Arrival on the Archetype in Action website.